Hello, I'm Hal Ottaway with the Wichita Postcard Club, and it's time once again for another postcard of the week. This week, we're going to try something a little bit different. Hope you'll enjoy. Over these last 6 or 8 months, something like that, we've been doing, well, longer than that, really, but we've been doing monthly presentations with our Wichita Postcard Club, and other clubs are doing some of the same things with other speakers. And then we're getting together, and it's just great. And we hope that you'll join us for some of these meetings too. It's like an old home week at the end when we get together and have some questions and answers back and forth with the speaker. But several months ago, during one of these questions and answers and talking with each other from different clubs all over the country, including the Toronto Postcard Club in Canada, we're asking kind of similar questions about what do we do with our postcards when something happens to us? And do we try to do something ahead of time? Or do we just leave it for whoever is the survivor? And what's best? Or how do different people do different things? And several months, well, a couple of months ago now, I think it was Catherine Hamilton Smith was interviewed in detail about her part of transferring the ownership of the Kurtite postcard. It was more than a collection; it was an inventory. It was their historical archives from their publishing company in Chicago. But this had been saved and given to one of the city entities there in Chicago. Had been They had a museum, they had staff to work and process and work with authors looking for images and so forth. Anyway, all of this was transferred, its ownership was transferred to the Newberry Library, which is also, thank goodness, in Chicago, made for a short trip. In any case, that whole thing that she explained and how it happened and the pitfalls and the happiness and how well it worked out. And then people talked afterwards again about their own collections and what they might do. We're thinking about just the possibilities, laying some of those out. What has happened to different people that we know or situations that we know of? And then maybe it will help some of the rest of us. Maybe it'll spark an idea or something, but to have known somebody else who did something and then to try to work it all out for ourselves. That's the happy part. But today we're going to be speaking with Tom Mulvaney in Mesa, Arizona. And it just so happens that several years ago, he transferred the ownership of his Montana postcard collection to the Montana State Historical Society. But that's the purpose of today's talk and getting background information. And so, Tom, if we could start and you give us kind of a brief story of how you assembled your collection and what they were thinking about or what they were given as a possibility for fundraising and so forth. I'll let you get it started on telling us about that. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, Hal. I look at the two of us with our gray hair, and you've got more of it than I do, plus nice beard and mustache going there. Uh, we've known each other since our hair was another color besides gray. Many years of collecting postcards. So yeah, I want to start just with a brief description of my progress over the years in building a postcard collection, and hopefully most of you can relate to this. I'm one of these guys that was always a collector from almost from the day I was born, I guess. Started out with collecting Lincoln Head pennies and Buffalo Head nickels. And then I found those 99-cent bags of stamps at the Woolworths 5 and dime store and got going on stamps and did a little baseball cards and everything, comic books. Anyway, postcards. We're talking about postcards here. I didn't know a thing about postcards. They're up in Montana where I lived. Never heard or knew of anybody that collected postcards. But one day, I think it was in about 1973, my grandpa up in Great Falls had just passed away. And among the things that I inherited from him was a stack of old postcards, probably about 50 of them. And gosh, I looked at them and they showed, some early street scenes of Helena, where I lived, and Great Falls, where he lived, and some other towns. And they were intriguing to me. And I guess at that point, the seed was planted. And I said, I gotta look into these old postcards and see what the heck's going on with those as far as collecting them and how I could go about that. Because I thought to myself, well, how about collecting postcards from Montana, where I was born and raised? So that's how I got started. And briefly, again, it was kind of a struggle at the beginning, trying to find out information about postcards and that. And I went to the library and looked through the Antique Trader and found like 3 classified ads in this great big newspaper about postcards. But that was the start. I saw an advertisement for Sowie Carver's Tuck postcard book. And so all of a sudden I was looking for Tuck postcards. And I then a little later on found out that there were postcard clubs around the country. And so that intrigued me. I wanted to get in touch with people from these clubs. And I started running ads in this newspaper that I discovered called Bar's Postcard News. And it was put out like every 2 weeks, and it was like 120 pages. And oh my gosh, I saw this auction one time from a guy in Wichita, Kansas, that had a bunch of old Montana postcards. His name was Hal Ottaway, and that's how I first knew about Hal. This is before I ever came to a Wichita Postcard Club show in October. So anyway, that's how I got going. One other thing to mention, postcard shows were all a long ways away from where I lived. Of course, Wichita is a long ways. The Seattle Club had a postcard show in Kent, Washington. That was a day's drive, but it was 600 miles. And then there was Portland, had a good postcard club show, the Webfooters. And then Denver, a little later on, I discovered Denver. So those were all postcard shows that I attended over the years. But they all took a little effort to traverse to them and back. So in 1985, I decided to start my own postcard show, and it lasted from 1985 to about 1992, right in Helena, Montana. And I actually did have a few dealers come from other parts of the country to set up at the show, and it was a way for me to not just sell postcards that I had wanted to get rid of. I was becoming a dealer at that time as well, with all my duplicates, but also to buy more Montana cards for my collection. So that's how I began to build my Montana postcard collection. And then, of course, later on, the internet came along and eBay came along and other websites came along. And as we all know today, that's one of the prime places to be able to add to your collection. So that pretty much covers how I got started in postcards, Hal.
Well, I understand. And, I'm just reliving a lot of those same years with you about what you're telling about. At what point did you decide you wanted to sell, Tom, or sell a portion of your collection? I know you have several different things that you look for and search for, but and then how did you go about to find a buyer for what you had that you wanted to sell?
Right. Before I get into that, I left out one point from building my collection. I wanted to thank Ovi Braskerud was the first fellow that I ever really communicated with. He was living in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area at the time. He had run an ad in Barr's Postcard News. I saw it. I said, all right, this guy wants to trade. And he wants all these different things, which I had a lot of. Maybe he can get me Montana postcards. And he sure enough did. We had a really good trading by the mail situation going for several years that added many great postcards to my collection. So I thank Obi for that. You probably realize he's still a member of the Postcard Club, one of the first ones to go to all the shows that the Wichita Postcard Club put on. So when did I first start thinking about selling my collection? Well,
Yes.
to establish that, let me explain to you, and I think a lot of you can relate to this. I was not a I am well, I'm a little richer than I was, but at the time I was starting to build my postcard collection, I didn't have a lot of money. I started out as a teacher, and then I got into state government. It was, a reasonable salary, but certainly not extravagant. And building a postcard collection, when you get into trying to find the better cards, can add up as far as money goes. So the point is, I put most of my excess money that I had into my postcard collection. And so as I was doing this, I looked at my postcard collection as something that I really enjoyed, and there was great history in it and all that sort of thing. But I also looked upon it as down the road as a savings account in lieu of the one that I never did with a bank or a credit union. So I was always thinking about it in the back of my head that someday, I'll probably wind up trying to sell my Montana postcard collection and hopefully get, a fair price for it. Now, it was about the time I retired from the state government that I worked for in Montana, about 2000, 2001, where I really started to seriously think about selling my collection. But before I did that, I wanted to do a book or two or three. And I did that with Arcadia Publishing, who most of you probably are familiar with. They do a lot of postcard history books. So I got my three books out of the way. I did one for Helena, one for Bozeman in the Gallatin Valley, and one for Glacier National Park. And once I had done that, then it really opened up to me that, okay, now it's time to look into seeing about selling my collection. So picking a buyer for your collection, well, it was pretty obvious to me that since my collection was focused on Montana, that the Montana Historical Society in Helena would be an ideal repository for the collection. You always have that opportunity to piecemeal your collection out, sell at shows, sell now you can sell on eBay and all that sort of thing. But I always wanted, I put this collection together. There was about 30,000 postcards in it, and I always wanted it to be kept together if possible. And so selling it to the Montana Historical Society was the logical place for me to go. Now, just to mention, there are, as I've discovered over the years, a number of universities and colleges that do have an appetite for buying old photographs and postcards and that sort of thing. So that's something I just mentioned to you. And of course, there are a number of museums around the Montana Historical Society is a museum that are always looking to add to their archives. So always keep that in mind. If you have a collection of um, Arkansas postcards, the Arkansas Historical Society might be something to look into. All right, so yeah, that was my first choice, and hopefully it would work out. And Hal, I'll turn it back to you. That's
Well,
where I went with it.
good. I think that gives us some background, like you've been saying. And then once you determine that maybe the door there at the Montana Historical Society, you needed to walk in and do some things, please tell us and explain to everybody how that worked and what you had to do and who you maybe already knew and things like that. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I have to say that I did have um, quite a bit of luck going for me in that I was working right across the street from the Montana Historical Society in the state capitol building. If you've ever been to Helena, they're situated almost side by side. And I would often take breaks and go to the Historical Society for just to look at the latest displays and that sort of thing. And in doing that, I made um, some very nice friendships and acquaintances with people that worked there, and including people that worked in the photo archives, which is where uh, postcards and photographs and stereo views, the images, um, that was where they stored, maintained them as in that particular area or branch of the Montana Historical Society. On top of that, I got really lucky because the person that was currently the director of the Montana Historical Society, the head guy, um, um, was a person I knew from working in the Capitol building. He had been the Secretary of State for a number of years, and anyway, his name is Mike Cooney, and Mike is a great guy. He collected Politico pins and badges. I see Hal kind of perked up there when I said that, uh, and he appreciated building a collection. And so one day I just happened to run into him, and I said, "Hey, Mike, how would I go about trying to sell the Montana Historical Society my Montana postcard collection? Would there be any way I could? What would be my approach?" And he said, "Well, Tom, what you would need to do is talk to the board of directors, and I think there's about 10 or 12 people that make up the board of directors for that museum, and you would need to make a presentation to them and then see where that goes." I said, "Wow, okay. Would that would I be able to get 5 or 10 minutes with them?" It turned out they met about, I think, every 2 months or so. And he said, "Yep. The next meeting's coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks. I'll get you the information, but I'll give you 15 minutes." I said, "Okay." That's wonderful. I thank you, Mike Cooney. So Mike got me in the door, and not to say that I might have been able to get in the door without knowing him, but that sure helped. And the 15 minutes was more than I ever expected, because they have an agenda that they follow, and they have a lot of business. And at that time, the Historical Society was trying to raise money for a new addition to their building. Their building was overloaded with stuff. They had a lot of stuff they had to keep in the basement because there just wasn't room for displays and all that sort of thing. So they had this project going on, and it's a big money project, you know, to add an addition, a new building, and so the chances that they would have any extra money for my postcard collection was real questionable. But anyway, so proceed. I prepared the best possible presentation I could for that board of directors meeting. Here it comes. Today's the day. I walk in the room. I had made some blow-ups of some of the best cards on 8.5 by 11 paper to hand around to the people so that they could get a look at some interesting Montana postcards, Charles Russell postcards, early small town Montana street scene, some good advertising cards, just a gamut of interesting postcards. At least I thought they would be, to the board of directors. And then I made my presentation, and I tried to stress one big selling point, and that is that this collection that I had of approximately 30,000 postcards was, to my knowledge, the best collection of Montana postcards that was probably in existence as far as I knew. And of course, they'd have to kind of take my word for that, but they did. They did believe me that 30,000 postcards was probably, if not the best, one of the best collections out there. And so, and they had some questions because a few of them were, I could see were, yeah, that'd be nice to have, but we just don't have the money right now. That type of attitude. Well, one of the board members, his name was Tom Nygaard, and I thank him to this day also. Brought up the point that, hey, he told his fellow board of directors, we've got an opportunity to add a Montana collection that's the best of its type to our archives. How can we let that go? We need to act on this. And his point about that perked up everybody, and they said, well, we can consider it, but how much is this thing going to cost? And so that was the question they put before me. And I told him, no, I really can't answer that question because it would be a conflict of interest. You know, I would be trying to tell you what my own collection's worth, and I might, it just, the credibility would not be there. I said, what needs to be done is it needs to be appraised, and it needs to be appraised by somebody that you would select yourselves, not me, that would be reputable and have the ability to make an accurate appraisal. They said, well, that makes sense. And I said, one more thing. If you do decide to have my collection appraised, what I will do is I'll bring that collection into the Historical Society, have it stored with you all the time that the appraisal is going on, and afterwards until a decision is made whether or not you want to proceed with buying it or not. Well, they liked that idea. I said, I'll pay half, you pay half of the appraisal. So they said, yeah, we can do that. How much is that going to be? I said, well, it'll probably be in the neighborhood of $5,000 because we're talking about it's going to take 4 or 5 days, I would think, to have the collection appraised accurately, and there's going to be transportation and room and board. We'll have to provide the appraiser wherever he comes from, and they said, yeah, we can allocate 2,500 if you allocate 2,500. So that was a deal. We had that done. So the next step was to get an appraisal or select an appraiser. And I did give them a list of several names of people I knew. And they initially selected a dealer from Seattle by the name of Mike Maslin. and he was all set to do it, but he had some medical issues pop up, and he had to back out. So then they went to a fellow from Salt Lake City that many of you Wichita postcard member, well, many of you postcard collectors around the country will know of. His name is Dennis Gorham from Salt Lake City, um, and he accepted the appraisal offer to do it, and so that was a big step forward right there. So fast forward, and now Dennis Gorham comes up to Montana. The collection is there at the Historical Society. They give him a office space to work with. He starts bringing in one box after another, and after about 4.5 days, he had completed the appraisal of the collection. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was in the neighborhood of somewhere between 350 and $400,000. And I thought that was a fair amount. He had me pick out 200 or 300 of the very best postcards that I thought were the best postcards, and do a line item listing of them, and then have them numbered 1 through 250 or however many it was. It was a good way for him to see what the quality of my collection was. And in doing that, as he proceeded through it, he would pick out more postcards that he thought were really good, $20 and up, say, postcards, and probably had 300 or more by the time he went through my collection. So he came up with that amount. And so now the next step was, well, present the appraisal at the next board meeting and see what they say. So I have to mention one other person. Well, there's several people, but one other person that really was very positive in backing the potential purchase of my collection, and that was the bureau chief for the photo archives. Her name is Molly Krukenberg, and Molly really helped me very immensely. There's no doubt in moving the process forward and making sure that everybody knew all the details of this. And so at the next board meeting, Molly was the person that spoke on behalf of me and my collection, and said that the photo archives people, which included Lori Morrow and Becca Cole, among others, and they also really were impressed with the collection. That that was important, that the people that would potentially receive the collection and work with it were positive about the collection. And a lot of that was Dennis Gorham's really good appraisal and his willingness to speak about it to the photo archives people. So here we go. The next board meeting. I'm holding my breath. I'm not 100% optimistic because the budget is the shortfall of the budget for the Historical Society is a challenge, and the amount of money that the appraisal came to was significant. So here's my next piece of good luck. The Historical Society didn't have the money to spend anywhere near that, but there was a private foundation. I don't know if every state has one of these or not. I think a lot of states probably have something like this. The foundation in Montana was called the Montana History Foundation, and their purpose, they were backed by some very historical minded wealthy people that funded, I guess you call them grants or annuities, uh, to help buy collections that the Montana History Foundation deemed worthy of preserving, whether it went to the Montana Historical Society or some other museum or the like in Montana. That was their focus. And they were, I think Molly probably contacted them, and thank goodness, and had filled them in, and they were willing to help subsidize the purchase of my collection through an annuity, they called it. And the way that worked was every, I think it worked out to be every 3 months, they would pay me an amount of money. And the amount of money turned out to be about $3,300, so a little $1,100 a month for as long as I lived, tax free. I mean, the taxes were covered in the annuity on top of what the Historical Society could pay, which turned out to be about I think about $160,000 is what they could allocate. So between that and the annuity, and then also I donated part of the collection, which was made sense tax wise because it offset most of the taxes that I would have to pay for the income that I got for selling my collection. So to summarize, a deal was made. I figured that if I lived 10 years after this happened, maybe it was like 11 or 12 years, that I would have got the amount of money that the appraisal was for, which how can you beat something like that? So I just had to make sure I kept kicking, I didn't kick the bucket. Uh, and so that's it's been about 15 or 16 years ago now that this deal was made. And so, yeah, I've come out really very well financially with the selling of my collection. And I hear from people every now and then that had come in and they were looking for some certain town or railroad depots or whatever it was, all the topics that are found in postcards. And they were delighted. Most of them they told me they were delighted that they could see these cards. And the Historical Society would then, if they wanted, make prints for them at a cost. So that's good to hear that it's accessible to the public. And that it's going to probably be years before they recoup all the costs, but they do have the collection and they have the value of the collection. So that's how it worked out for me, and I have to say I was very lucky to have it all work out the way it did. So Hal, back to you.
Well, that's just terrific, Tom. It couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And to have such a happy ending for it to go someplace, you know where it is, you know it's safe, you have good people there, and they will, their jobs they go to retirement at some point, but other people will step in with Montana history, certainly in their frontal lobe, and they'll be continuing to push onward to that. I think it's just great, and thank you for this opportunity to look at another collector or a collector. I guess Catherine it wasn't her collection, but she was just the person who was in charge of it when it was there in Chicago. But to have a postcard collector come in and explain and talk to us about your own situation and how things developed, and uh, just terrific. And thank you. And we'll hope to find some other people to talk to and maybe get another, look at how we might get rid of our postcards or what we might do with them or what the alternatives are. You certainly had a great collection and it went to a wonderful repository for sure. Thank you, Tom, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Glad,
Okay.
glad, glad to be able to tell you my story.
Oh, great. Thanks so much.